just to add a point here about the strength or the decisiveness of proofs in Islam, I'll just throw in a beneficial point, not so directly related to this material, but you've heard of Ijmaa, consensus, as well, being a source of legislation. And the Shaykh is going to talk about how even a qiyas has a base in a text from the book or a text from the Messenger, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The usuliyun call that a mustanid. It has to have some kind of foundation in the book or the sunnah. But the ijma', when ijma' is established, the ijma' is more decisive in its proof and more binding as a proof than texts of the book and the sunnah. Think about what I've said, because some people would be shocked. Ijma', consensus. You usually hear Quran, Sunnah, Ijma' in that order. But now I'm saying to you that Ijma' in terms of the decisiveness of the proof, the fact that everyone has to submit to it and there's no discussion after Ijma' has been established and proven. Whereas people may have an ayat which is abrogated, people may have an ayat which is general, people may have an ayat which is not entirely clear in the wording, which needs other verses to explain it. And in fact, you find many discussions about fiqh matters. One we discussed last night, لا يمسه إلا المطهرون, that no one touches the Quran except those who have been purified. The same proof being used by opposite positions in a fiqh discussion, where differences of opinion are held. So the ayat from the Quran, it's not the case that someone brings an ayat and now the discussion is over because he brought an ayat. What else can you say? There is a way to look at the ayat. There is an understanding of the ayat where the people don't agree, oftentimes, right? The same thing with the hadith. Perhaps there can be some criticism of the hadith by its chain that is not agreed upon. Some people might say it just passes the level of authenticity. It's called Hasan li ghayrihi. Another scholar of hadith, a specialist, might say it doesn't, it's not strengthened by its route, so it remains da'if. And so there's differing over the hadith based on that. Also, there is as well general wordings in the hadith, specific wordings. There are hadith which are abrogated as well, and so on. So it's not the case that you bring a hadith and the discussion is over. Right? There is a way that a hadith can be understood and even used by both sides of an argument, the same hadith being used. But what is it that's the end-all proof that no discussion may continue after it is established? It's the ijma' of the Muslims. When you say, for example, I was in a lesson of one of the scholars and they mentioned how there is an angle to say that some of the skin of the pig may not be najas. And then one of the students mentioned ijma', mentioned by the scholars, that the pig and everything connected to the pig is najas by consensus. And then my scholar said, khalas, the discussion is over, ijma' has been mentioned, ijma' is established here, there is no going into it or discussing the matter any further. Why is it? Because the scholars understood the statement of Allah, وَمَنْ يُشَاقِقَ الرَّسُولَ مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا تَبَيَّنَ لَهُ الْهُدَى. Anyone who contradicts the messenger after clear guidance has been conveyed to him. That's when textual evidence is explicitly clear. وَيَتَّبِعْ غَيْرَ سَبِيلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. And he follows other than the way of the believers. They said that's إِجْمَاعُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ, إِجْمَاعُ الْأَئِمَّةِ. The imams, the scholars of fiqh, making a total consensus on an issue, all agreeing to an issue. Then violating their way, what does it lead to? نَصْلِهِ جَهَنَّمْ what is it? وَيَتَّبِعْ غَيْرَ سَبِيلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ نُوَلِّهِ مَا تَوَلَّى وَنَصْلِهِ جَهَنَّمْ وَسَاءَتْ مَصِيرًا. We turn him to what he has turned himself to, and we will enter him into the fire. What an evil abode. So they said, اتباع غير سبيل المؤمنين means direct contradiction to an issue of ijma'. There is no permissibility for a person to continue in any argument once ijma' has been mentioned. So in terms of the decisiveness of the proof, the ijma' takes a priority, being the most decisive kind of proof, the end of all arguments, once the ijma' is established. And ijma', not everyone who cites ijma', consensus, is given that it's actually ijma', because a lot of times a scholar would say all of the scholars agree to this, but you find other scholars who didn't agree. So then his claim of ijma' after investigation doesn't actually check out. So it's not that any claim of ijma' becomes the binding proof. As I said to you, the established ijma', that which has been investigated by the scholars and found to be ijma', that none of the scholars have ever disagreed on that matter.